On July 30th, 2020, Hong Kong authorities barred 12 pro-democracy candidates from the upcoming Legislative Council election originally scheduled for September 6, 2020. On August 11, the city police arrested several prominent pro-democracy advocates, including media mogul Jimmy Lai and social activist Agnes Chow, and issued arrest warrants against 6 Hong Kong overseas-based democracy activists. The highly anticipated Legislative Council election has now been postponed for a year amid the resurgence of COVID-19 cases.
We know that there is a surge of new confirmed cases in Hong Kong for the past many weeks. So we certainly think that by September time, the cases will continue to remain at a level that I think is not wise for people to come out to vote.
This is a citywide impression that the Carrie Lam administration obviously has taken advantage of this coronavirus panic and scare to postpone the legislative election.
Just how bad is the new wave of COVID-19 infections in the city? New Zealand, with their relatively low rates of deaths and infections, called off their polls. But South Korea and Singapore continued with the elections in the midst of a pandemic. So, what is the right call to make between public health safety and elections for a mandate to rule? And what's the future of democracy in the city, long regarded as a bastion of freedom in the region? Fear and uncertainty loom large over the Special Administrative Region ever since the new security law came into force in July this year. The often defiant and vocal residents who once filled the city streets have all but disappeared. Adding to the air of uncertainty, the much-awaited Legislative Council election, a potent symbol of the democracy in Hong Kong, has now been delayed by about a year. 40-year-old Jacob Mark, who works in the manufacturing industry, was looking forward to the September elections. He felt that the polls would give him an opportunity to exercise his rights as a citizen and help shape the city's future. But the sense of excitement has now turned into anger and disappointment after he learned that the election has now been postponed.
That is totally not acceptable because it lacks the legal basis, and countries worldwide, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, or even mainland China themselves have elections or government meetings on a regular basis. So why should Hong Kong's legislative election should be postponed at all? Disappointed, definitely. Angry, yes. And happy, no way.
On July 31st, Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced that she was invoking the Emergency Regulations Law to postpone the elections, citing the resurgence of COVID-19 cases in the city. Mrs. Lam added that the move was supported by the central government in Beijing and insisted that it was taken entirely for the safety of the people in Hong Kong.
This is a very difficult decision for me and the Executive Council. This decision is made purely on the basis of the public health concerns.
The city has reported more than 4,600 COVID-19 cases so far. 75 of the victims have died. The authorities will also begin mass testing this month to help curb the spread of the disease to a wider population. Convener of Hong Kong's Executive Council, Mr. Bernard Chan, said that postponement of the election is entirely non-political and done in the interest and safety of the people.
From what I understand, over the last couple of months, many elections overseas has been cancelled too. There are elections that went ahead, but there are also elections that have been cancelled or postponed, including the mayor election in UK was also postponed for 1 year. So it really depends on the circumstances. In Hong Kong case, we have around over 4.4 million registered voters, and we are expecting a large turnout like we saw the last district council election. So we think at least 3 million people will come forward, and also given the experience that we just had a few months ago with the district council, you have people waiting in long queue for hours, right? So, and that is certainly against the current restriction, the current social distancing restriction. So that will contradict, it will totally contradict all the efforts we put in controlling public health. So it doesn't make sense.
Still, many young voters like Angie T are not happy with the decision to delay the election. The 26-year-old paralegal was looking forward to vote in the Legislative Council election on September 6, which are held once in every 4 years.
You've seen that Korea and Singapore and many, like over 60 countries in the world or cities in the world, they have faced a very serious COVID-19 situation in their places, and they did not postpone, or if they postpone it for like a few months, not like a year.
But others, like IT entrepreneur Louis Chan, disagrees. He believes an election should be held in a very safe environment, free of violence or disease.
其實如果係從自己嘅內心嚟講咧，其實延遲1年選舉咧係有少少失望嘅。但係咧就係而家嘅疫情，香港嘅疫情係好嚴重，係啊。今日我睇咗新聞係已經係有5800幾宗嘅一個個案，係啊，同埋已經係有好多日啊，第三波疫情嚟咗之後咧，有好多日咧係超過3位數嘅一個數字。每日係啊，所以呢個疫情係好嚴重嘅，所以就係出現咗呢個延遲押後1年嘅一個結果咧，其實都係可以接受。
I would say that it's very difficult to have any conclusion on that. The reason is you have so many countries having election as usual, like Korea and also Singapore as well. Yeah, but in the meantime, in terms of the kind of measurement against COVID-19, I would say that the decision may not be wrong. Eventually, no one knows, because of if the election actually cause more cases, then it will become a disaster.
The Legislative Council, or LegCo, is Hong Kong's top decision-making body. Elected members scrutinize government bills, control public expenditure, and monitor the government's performance. But only half the seats are directly elected by the public, while the other half are mostly filled with Beijing loyalists. To the pro-democracy camp, the September 2020 LegCo election is an opportunity to make their voices heard, particularly after the turbulent events that have rocked Hong Kong in the past 1 year. The election would also offer them a real shot at capturing majority seats in the legislature for the first time.
Our goal, the Democrats' goal, was to achieve a legislative majority, what we call 35 plus out of a total of 70 seats, right? And it's just possible that we might achieve that.
Beijing's perspective always is about whether you collude with Americans, especially collude with the so-called hostile forces in Hong Kong against China. Now it looks like once you actually say that you are pro-democracy camp, then they will say that you are trying to collude with foreign forces. Then you try to fight with me. Yeah, I think the message totally changed under current scenario.
That was precisely the message that Beijing received last year. In June and July 2019, Hong Kong witnessed never-before turnouts of some 2 million people on the streets to protest against the extremely unpopular extradition bill. The bill, if passed, would have allowed Hong Kong to extradite criminal suspects to mainland China. Hong Kong has resisted it until it was finally withdrawn.
We are deeply divided. There are those who are not happy with the government, with some of the decisions they make towards perhaps the extradition law last year. Some are not happy with the way how the police handle the social unrest. But at the same time, we also have Hong Kong residents not happy with how the young people have turned so violent. Some of them have, taking their voice to the streets, and some of them are using, the act of terrorism to intimidate people. So that, clearly, I think Hong Kong is very divided on a lot of the issues.
Still, the district council election held in November 2019 produced an unexpected outcome. Hong Kong residents used the municipal election to register their deep unhappiness with the government. The council seats have traditionally been held by pro-Beijing supporters. That changed last year when the pro-Beijing candidates lost 2/3 of their seats to the pro-democracy candidates. 17 out of 18 district councils were won by the pro-democracy camp. Beijing's patience soon ran out. On June 30th, on the eve of the anniversary of the July 1st handover of Hong Kong from British rule back to China, the central government unilaterally passed the highly controversial National Security Law. The law criminalizes any act of secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign and external forces. Among its key objectives is to put an end to years of violent pro-democracy protests and stamp out growing opposition to Chinese rule.
The national security law is in place to ensure that the city can return back to law and order. I think that last year was quite troubling. A lot of Chinese companies start to think twice about Hong Kong because of what happened, and especially what happened was that there was some hostility towards Chinese executive and Chinese company. So I think that's so important. So otherwise, we will be caught in a worse situation where we will have U.S. company leaving and Chinese company are not coming.
Louis Chan is an IT entrepreneur. In his early 30s, Louis dabbles in internet technology and artificial intelligence. The father of 3 young children, Louis feels the national security law is good for Hong Kong, both from the perspective of personal safety and the economy.
但係國安法嘅一個出台咧，我覺得係一個不得已而為之嘅一種做法，就係真係逼到已經係完全係冇辦法，係啊，因為我哋都知道就係香港係一個好重要嘅國際金融中心。咁金融中心最緊要嘅係2個方面，第一方面咧就係社會嘅穩定，你要一個穩定嘅地方，呢個地方先有得發展。第二個元素咧就係市民個人身安全要有保障，但係舊年個反修例運動就係睇唔到呢2點嘅，所以國安法嘅出台咧係確保咗呢2點。
But the law means something different to the pro-democracy movement. They see it as an attempt to silence critics and limit freedoms of residents.
Yes, the national security law has a great impact in the freedom of speech in Hong Kong. Actually, even before that, the locals have started changing their names on Facebook, trying to go anonymous in order to have their voice out or speak the truth, hoping that their true identity wouldn't be identified. And now with this national security law, it went even further. That, well, you see a couple of days ago, the Apple Daily, the local newspapers get raided by the police. And I heard that it was even before they show their warrants. That's not the way it was when Hong Kong was under a strict common law regime.
And before the dust has settled, the government made the controversial decision to postpone the Legislative Council election. How will the decision impact the democracy movement in Hong Kong? And with Chief Executive Carrie Lam's approval rating plunging to a historic low of 9%, how will the Provisional LegCo govern Hong Kong in the days ahead, especially when decisive leadership is needed in times of a global pandemic and facing one of the worst economic recessions ahead? The pro-democracy camp had hoped to use the momentum of public unhappiness over the proposed extradition law to carry them to victory in the upcoming September LegCo elections. But it was not meant to be. On July 30th, just one day before the end of the political nomination period, the Electoral Affairs Commission disqualified 12 opposition candidates. And then, on July 31st, hot on the heels of the disqualification, Mrs. Carrie Lam announced that LegCo elections will be postponed for 1 year due to the re-emergence of COVID-19 cases.
This is a very difficult decision for me and the Executive Council. This decision is made purely on the basis of the public health concerns. It is now uncertain what will happen to Hong Kong's Legislative Council in the next 12 months. That's why I have sought support and help from the central government.
Hong Kong voters did not mince their words over the perceived overreach by Beijing in the affairs of the city.
Of course it's not fair, but according to them it's all legitimate. Somehow some returning officer, some mere middle-ranking official inside the government could decide whether you could run. I mean, how more absurd can things be? Oh, you're not patriotic enough, so go away, you're not allowed to run. It's all political. It's political screening. It's very unacceptable. It's very symbolic, this gesture of disqualifying potential candidates, because they're practically telling you the big brother, the big boss, can just do what he wants, and they will do whatever it takes to achieve what they want to see in Hong Kong.
However, the government maintains that Hong Kong still places a lot of emphasis on the rule of law and due process. The disqualified candidates can appeal against the decision through the courts and get themselves reinstated.
But the good thing about Hong Kong is that we always have a due process. So even that's been the case, obviously the candidate themselves, the invalidated candidate, they can always lodge an appeal through the court system. And we have done so in the past. In fact, over the last couple of years, we have candidates who actually won the appeal. There are those who lost too, but there are those who won the appeal.
But some observers believe that the situation in Hong Kong is changing rapidly. The recent developments are a clear testimony to Beijing's changed attitude towards Hong Kong.
There have been significant political changes in Hong Kong since June. Number one, the unexpected legislation of national security law, which imposes severe restrictions on Hong Kong's civil liberties. And secondly, the government's decision to disqualify more than a dozen of pan-Democrats. And then finally, we see the announcement again, which is again surprising, the postponement of the election for 1 year, 1 calendar year, So when you add these three things up together, it shows that Beijing leaders have running short of political patience. They can no longer tolerate the public political dissent in Hong Kong.
IT entrepreneur Louis Chan, for one, has grown tired of all the politicking, which has been going on in the city for years. He just wants stability to return to the territory once again, even if it means giving China more powers to manage and influence the affairs of the city. What matters most to Louis is the economic well-being of the people.
香港係一個全世界都公認嘅一個法治嘅社會，但係你舊年係睇到就係法院嘅門口係可以放火嘅，係啊，銀行門口嘅獅子咧，又係可以將佢對眼咧又燒咗佢嘅，係啊，街路上遇見自己政見係唔同嘅人咧，又可以互相打嘅，係啊，所以係一個好混亂嘅一個社會。但係國安法嘅一個出台咧，我覺得係一個不得已而為之嘅一種做法，就係真係逼到已經係完全係冇辦法。社會係唔可以將焦點就擺喺政治爭拗入邊，因為好多時候政治爭拗咧係完全係冇意思嘅，因為香港係一個商業社會，同埋咧香港人係要去發展嘅，香港嘅青年人咧都係要去發展嘅。
But there are many others in Hong Kong who do not share the same view. To them, greater democratic freedom is key to the city's vibrant economy and future prosperity.
If we really care about the livelihood issues, we should have more democratic voices and noises inside the legislature to make things work. We've had too many complaints that despite some supposed huge handouts by the government to help different trades and industries, many people have actually failed to get any assistance.
The reality is, the global economy is already badly bruised almost 9 months into the COVID-19 pandemic. And experts say the worst is yet to come. The International Monetary Fund has projected global growth to shrink to minus 4.9% this year. And Hong Kong's economy will not be spared. It is now mired in recession. Real GDP growth for the year is expected to be revised downwards to a range of minus 6 to minus 8%.
Well, it has been a very difficult 2 years for Hong Kong residents. Now, we obviously have gone through the social unrest in the second half of 2019. And now, of course, we have now COVID. And COVID will likely to stay for a long time. So economically, I think for the retail sector has been the most hard hit, from the unrest last year to COVID this year. So, and of course, apart from those more recent issues, we also have some underlying social injustice in Hong Kong for the many years. And that is the rich and poor divide. In fact, that's part of the reason of the unrest too.
If you look into like poverty situation, people cannot imagine, for example, 7 million people, how many people are living in poverty? Can you imagine? Now, based on statistics, almost 1.3 million. So you cannot imagine that such rich society, then so many people live in this kind of very much miserable situation. So also that's also why people are not happy.
And with the elections postponed for 1 year, will the next 12 months give the pro-Beijing candidates more time to prove their mettle and perchance to tip the election odds in their favor?
If they don't like the government now, they'll continue not like the government a year from now. So by postponing 1 year, it's not going to actually help the governments to gain back the votes. No, definitely not. So I think the whole suggestions of postponing it will help the government to gain back some vote. Totally not. I don't think so. However, I do agree though. If we can actually manage to control the virus, okay, if we can manage to control the virus, and we bring back some economic activities, maybe perhaps we can retain some of the supports that we normally get.
As for the pro-democracy camp, the challenge will be how to keep the momentum going and survive in a much tougher environment.
So I think the public expect them to keep on their fights for maintaining our civil liberties. The public also expect them to play smart, to fight in a smart way so that they can evade immediate arrest, so that they can still operate, they can still function.
With the cloud of uncertainty and fear hanging over the city, how will the democracy movement in Hong Kong survive? Will it have enough political leverage and room to maneuver? Hong Kong is often seen as a rare beacon of freedom in the region. But that appears to be changing rapidly of late, as China begins to flex its muscles on the territory. In what's seen as another major blow to the pro-democracy camp, 12 leading opposition candidates were barred from running in the elections on account of their opposition to the new national security law. They included 4 incumbent LegCo members and well-known activist Joshua Wong. 4 incumbent district councillors were also disqualified. The 12 nominees were considered unfit to run for public office because they're seen to have advocated Hong Kong's independence, worked with foreign governments, and failed to recognize the People's Republic's sovereignty over Hong Kong.
It shows that the Beijing leaders have running short of political patience. Okay, they can no longer tolerate the public political dissent in Hong Kong. Okay, nor the protests, and then nor can they accept the fact that many Hong Kong people, they don't agree with the extradition law. They don't even agree with the so-called national anthem law, and then culturally speaking, they don't even identify themselves as Chinese.
The reality is, the national security law has ushered in a new era of fear and uncertainty in Hong Kong. Views which are deemed critical of the central government will not be tolerated, and harsh punishment awaits those who break the law, including a maximum penalty of life behind bars for the more serious crimes.
National security law is very much a law made by central government. Then they have a lot of so-called unknown clause there. So even they say that something, when you do that, you can be prosecuted. But in the meantime, they don't know whether this kind of scenario they will be prosecuted. Then how long they will serve in jail. You can see people now actually delete the social media account. Then they are actually trying to decline the interview from the journalist. That's a very clear sign that they try to protect themselves through actually not being as outspoken as before.
Self-censorship is going to be even more rife amongst the local press, and people will be more cautious about speaking up and speaking out. I took a taxi only a few days ago, and poor taxi driver said, "Hey, I used to talk freely about what I think about the government with my passengers, but now I better be careful because you see, I have my registration label here, complete with my name and my vehicle number, plate number, and I better be careful. Oh dear me.
All of a sudden, the sense of cautious optimism that emerged following the handover of the territory to China in 1997 appears to have vanished overnight. It has now been replaced by a sense of foreboding and a growing pessimism about the future. Some believe when people are afraid to speak their minds for fear of reprisals, that's when democracy dies.
In the recent year, particularly over the past 5 to 6 years, mainland China are much more careful about Hong Kong's situation. So they will actually have a lot of people based in Hong Kong to collect information. They also try to censor all information flow in mainland China, particularly about Hong Kong. If you talk about something about Hong Kong, your WeChat account may be blocked. Yeah, because of they worry about that kind of debate in Hong Kong will affect mainland China. So to some extent, they worry about Hong Kong's democracy. Democracy will actually affect China's people's demand for democracy. But eventually, I would say that it's quite different because of some leadership in China in the past, they emphasize Hong Kong and China actually are quite different. You do your business, I do my business. You are a river, I'm a sea. So basically, we are not actually try to affect each other. It's very difficult. A river cannot affect a sea. So in the past, they have this kind of competence, but now the situation is very complicated.
But despite the chilling effect of the national security law, there are still many Hong Kongers who are willing to stand up, speak their minds, and be counted.
So one of the reasons why I'm willing to come up to take this interview is one way of getting the Hong Kong people's voice heard.
I think it's an early sign of things getting worsening. But then, having said that, am I saying that that's the end, the death of Hong Kong's democracy fight? I doubt it, because our young have been fighting for their future. And indeed, it's their future they're fighting for. And time is on their side.
The government, however, says nothing much has really changed in the city since the introduction of the new security law. The people can continue to exercise their democratic rights and freedom as long as they operate within the bounds of the law or do not make any attempts to try and split the country.
Back in '97, I still remember, because that's even before I joined politics, there's already talk of Hong Kong will doom after the communist China take over of Hong Kong in '97. Well, after 23 years, that's proven not to be the case. Hong Kong continued to be as free as, in fact, probably freer than before '97. So we proved that wrong. So I think the current time, the current crisis, probably, again, it would take time. It would take time to prove again to our own people and as well to the outside world that business goes on and we continue to have that freedom that we continue to have. Now, of course, provided you don't cross that line, provided you don't cross and subverting the state power or asking for the independence of Hong Kong. Now, you don't cross those red lines, and then I don't think it will matter to most other people in Hong Kong.
For now, both the pro-Beijing and pro-democracy camps are doing what they can over the next 12 months to up their game and ensure a significant victory in next year's electoral polls. Will the pro-Beijing candidates be able to make an impact at the polls a year from now? And can the pro-democracy camp keep up its momentum until the next electoral election and survive in a much tougher and less predictable political environment? Irrespective of which way the wind blows, the reality is Beijing regards Hong Kong as an inseparable part of China, and it will do everything within its powers to ensure that the territory will not drift away.
Well, first thing first, I think China would want to keep one country, two system intact. Now, mainland officials have repeatedly remind Hong Kong, remind the world that they want to keep the two system the way it is. So that's important because they have no intention to just turn Hong Kong to another mainland city. You know, why would they need to, right? So they would prefer Hong Kong to keep the two system. So the two system has its own uniqueness, right? So we have an independent, our court legal system that's very independent from the mainland. So the way of life is different. So the law and order, the judiciary system. Now, however, while you are two system, we are still very much part of one country.
The challenge facing Beijing now is how to win over the people of Hong Kong and share the common vision of a strong and economically prosperous China. For now, Beijing feels that it has created the conditions for stability in Hong Kong through the new security law, even if that means curbing the city's limited political freedom.
Despite her low approval ratings, Mrs. Carrie Lam still has a city to govern, to contain the pandemic as well as to keep the Hong Kong economy afloat. What more can Mrs. Lam do to best convey Beijing's vision of success for Hong Kong?
The Greater Bay Area is also another new initiative launched by the central government. So how can Hong Kong play a role? We are just right next to, we are part of the Greater Bay Area, so we should be able to serve not just Hong Kong 7.4 million, but the entire region of 70 million people. If we continue to shut our doors on them, then we will be marginalized.
It's an ambitious plan, one that's designed to spur the economy of Hong Kong and neighboring major Chinese cities of about 70 million people. Known as the Greater Bay Area Initiative, the plan is to link some 9 cities in southern China with 2 special administrative regions, Hong Kong and Macau. It's the central government's grand plan to facilitate growth through the integration of these cities, each acting as a key hub for a different sector. For example, Hong Kong has been slated to be the hub for international finance, trade and transport. Macau has been earmarked as an international tourism city. Guangzhou, an administrative hub, while Shenzhen will be expanded further into a special economic zone and technological hub. Once completed, it will be a leading global technology and innovation cluster, one that could rival the Silicon Valley, a major technology powerhouse in the US.
We are part of the Greater Bay Area, so we should be able to serve not just Hong Kong 7.4 million, but the entire region of 70 million people. But we have to understand Greater Bay Area. We understand them first.
IT entrepreneur Louis Chan has a technology company in Shenzhen, one of the cities in the Greater Bay Area. And he's among those who are excited to know that Hong Kong is part of the grand plan to develop the region into a thriving mega city one day.
中國咧，其實佢而家係運行緊一種叫類循環經濟嘅一種經濟模式，就係你去睇中國，佢係全世界唯一一個地方，佢係全產業鏈都有嘅，同埋我哋係有好多個經濟板塊，譬如話粵港澳大灣區啊、京津冀啊或者長三角啊呢啲區。戰略區都係可以互相做一啲經濟方面嘅一啲內循環嘅一啲作用。咁對於我自己嘅一啲生意嚟講，因為我係做互聯網嘅，咁又係有 AI 方面嘅一啲技術啦。
But as developments begin, enormous challenges remain. For example, the plan has sparked some concerns among Hong Kongers about the impact it will have on the principle of one country, two systems framework. Some have expressed fears that the integration of these cities will lead to a further erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy status as well as its position as an international global financial hub.
It would be a disastrous idea if Hong Kong had to be incorporated in the Greater Bay Area without being able to remain our unique status and the privilege that we had. It would be disastrous because this is the cornerstones of Hong Kong. If we lost it, it has no meaning to create a Greater Bay.
Others also have the view that the Greater Bay Area plan will only benefit the wealthier segments of the population, while the poor and the vulnerable will be left behind.
They actually ignore one very important part of people is most vulnerable people in Hong Kong, so-called the poor segment of the population in Hong Kong. Most of them are cleaners, they maybe like workers in the construction sites. They could not compete with mainland Chinese. If they go to Shenzhen, they even earn even lower salary. So they only can survive in Hong Kong. If you want to have more property, go to Greater Bay Area. Then if you are professional, for example, you are teaching in Hong Kong, you are a professor in Hong Kong, you could actually teach in Greater Bay Area. So no problem. It's, they are very, very better off. But in terms of very much ordinary people, they are struggling with their daily lives. How could you imagine that the Greater Bay Area development could actually really eventually benefit them? That's a big question mark.
The government, however, disagrees. It says that Hong Kong's future prosperity is inextricably linked to that of China.
If we continue to shut our doors from them, then we will be marginalized. So whether we are marginalized or not is really entirely up to Hong Kong people to decide. We need to understand that. So I think for some of our young people, they actually want less to do with China. I think that is a mistake. The less you know about China, the less the future of Hong Kong has.
At the heart of the matter, there seems to be so much distrust among the people in Hong Kong about Beijing's real intention on what a successful Hong Kong should look like. Until today, the people remain divided between those who would like to see greater and rapid integration with China and those who cherish the territory's unique status.
我覺得中央對於香港咧係一種好無私嘅愛，係同埋係一種就係好大包容度嘅一種給予啊！你睇其實一國兩制呢個制度嘅一個設計係啊，就係允許咩咧？喺中國佢作為一個單一制嘅一個社會主義國家，佢係允許自己咧喺一個地方政府入邊去實行一個資本主義。其實呢個就係一種好大嘅包容嘅一種做法嚟嘅。中央佢係完全係冇諗過要多一個好似深圳一樣嘅，好似上海一樣嘅香港，所以我覺得係完全係唔使擔心呢個香港喺中央方面嘅一個地位。
I would think that they don't care if Hong Kong succeed or fail. Well, if Hong Kong succeed, good. They've got chances to make a lot of money.
I think Beijing is just worried about that the recession, together with the dragging a lot, the elongation of this movement may raise the risk for the Chinese people, especially in southern part of China, to be more, daring to challenge Beijing's one-party rule. That's the one they want to avert, okay? And that's why they have taken a tough hand against Hong Kong.
Experts believe that in the central government's calculations, Hong Kong's stability outweighs all other considerations. After years of political turmoil, Beijing now finds it important to step in to restore order in the territory. The imposition of the new security law and the tough actions taken against pro-democracy advocates and activists signal Beijing's unwavering resolve to put an end to the cycle of protests and prevent the people from drifting further away from the mainland.
But I think right now with the national security law, in place, hopefully the law and order will remain.
I would say that now they are more care about so-called regime stability. So they are much more care about whether they can make communist party rule for many, many years. So they don't want Hong Kong people's so-called liberal minds jeopardize their interest. They don't want Hong Kong's ideology spread to mainland China. So at the very beginning, they are quite passive about that. They will think, oh, we run differently. You are river, I'm a sea. So basically, I don't worry about the kind of so-called diffusion. Now they are much more active. They actively stop the so-called diffusion of Hong Kong's liberal minds to mainland China. So they much more care about their own domestic regime stability.
Is it just a matter of time before the sun sets on Hong Kong's unique status as the central government appears increasingly impatient with the city? Who wins, who loses when Hong Kong fades?
The reality is Hong Kong will survive, but its future is an open question. What's certain is that China will shape a new narrative for Hong Kong from now on. One that will see Beijing exercising greater control over the territory's internal affairs to help put an end to potential challenges to its one-party rule once and for all, for better or for worse.
I just hope we will survive through this chapter of Hong Kong history, that things will just get better and better, and that the sovereign power in Beijing would understand that Hong Kong is different, and we need just a bit more compassion in their attitude vis-a-vis Hong Kong.
Obviously, I understand people are worried about the future, the uncertainty, but we've gone through those crises before, and each time we overcome. And the key message is that China continues to believe in Hong Kong. They continue to believe in one country, two systems. So I think that's the key, because they will do everything to make sure it works. So I cannot imagine why China wants to hurt Hong Kong, provided that you don't try to hurt them. You don't try to take advantage of Hong Kong's legal system or the transparencies and to destabilize Hong Kong or in China. So along those rules, I think China would want to make sure that Hong Kong's best interest is being preserved.